Hey everyone, hope you're well. Let's talk some Jimmy Page, shall we? Today we're going to have a countdown, a bit of a discussion, so don't complain about all the talking, and a playthrough of what are, in my opinion, the 10 greatest Jimmy Page guitar solos this legendary guitarist ever put down on Zeppelin's 8 recorded studio albums. Most of the famous ones will be here, of course, with a few inclusions that you might not expect. However, like I usually say in these cases, my video, my list. Now, like I said, I'm going to chit-chat a bit here about Jimmy Page before we get started. So if you want to bypass all this dialogue and get straight to the countdown, you can skip ahead to about the 6-minute mark. But please don't. Now, it goes without saying that Jimmy Page was one of the greatest and most influential guitarists in rock and roll history. Find any list of the greatest guitar players of all time, and you'll surely find his name in the top 10, often top 5, and occasionally number 1. And I agree with this assessment 100%. However, there are naysayers out there who think otherwise, and their usual criticism is that Jimmy Page was a sloppy guitarist, and can't understand how a sloppy guitar player can be considered one of the greatest guitar players of all time. To this, I say hogwash. Now, I'm old, fairly old, and while I was too young to be into Zeppelin when they first burst on the scene in the late 60s, early 70s, I was onto them in the late 70s before the highly technical guitar shred boom exploded on the scene during the 80s. Back then, very, very few people called Page a sloppy guitarist. He was almost universally held in very high regard as a guitar player, despite the fact that there were indeed cleaner and more technically proficient guitarists on the scene, such as Ritchie Blackmore and Uli John Roth, amongst a few others. That was just Jimmy Page's style, you know. Then 10 to 15 years later, when all the shredders appeared and took technical guitar playing to another level, along came some of the first Jimmy Page naysayers. Speed, technicality, and precision became the new high benchmark of guitar playing. All things that Jimmy Page was admittingly lacking a little bit in. He wasn't ridiculously fast. He didn't sweep pick arpeggios or use exotic scales like Phrygian dominant and whatnot. And yes, he wasn't exactly the most precise with all of his notes. And yes, sometimes his brain could outrace his fingers on occasion. Yet Jimmy had something that very, very few of these technically proficient sound-alikes didn't have. A whole lot of style. Style and an incredible ingrained sense of melody in his playing. And I'll take those over technical wankery every day of the week and twice on Sunday. So the question remains, however, was it sloppy guitar playing? Sure, a little bit, occasionally. However, I like to look at it another way and use a different term to describe Jimmy's playing. And that term is loose. Loose is a much better way to describe Jimmy's playing and soloing style. Jimmy had a reckless, fearless, and unpredictable approach to soloing that at the time was mesmerizing, fresh, and damned exciting to listen to. Now, when I say that he was occasionally sloppy, there is one and only one recorded solo that I will cite as an example, because honestly, I can't think of any others. And that solo is the solo to Heartbreaker, often cited by the naysayers as a sloppy mess, yet by others, including me, as one of the greatest guitar solos of all time. With regards to Heartbreaker, I personally think that loose, reckless, bombastic 40-second flurry of notes was exactly what Jimmy was going for. It was meant to be jarring and uncomfortable to listen to. For example, in contrast, the second half of the solo couldn't be more different than the first half. It's clean, it's concise, melodic, and well played. It's like two different guitar players, Obviously it isn't, which can only lead to the conclusion, at least to me, that that blast of unaccompanied guitar noise that opens the solo to Heartbreaker was wholly intentional. Intentional and brilliant, I have to add, or, maybe it was just wasted, which leads me to my next point. Now, live is where Jimmy gets the most grief for playing sloppily, and I'm not really going to touch upon this too much because it barely deserves mentioning with regards to his talent. He was almost always wasted live, plain and simple. He had some serious drug and alcohol issues at the time, and I really don't need to tell you that it ain't easy playing guitar when you're absolutely wrecked out of your head to the point of barely being conscious on stage. It's a far better criticism of Jimmy Page to say that he was a wasted guitar player than he was a sloppy guitar player. Because as far as his recorded output over the course of 10 years or so with Led Zeppelin, he certainly wasn't. That is, unless he wanted to be. Heartbreaker being the case in point. Regardless, with all of that said, time to start the list. Let's move on to the top 10. These are what I consider to be the top 10 greatest Jimmy Page guitar solos put down by this often wasted guitar genius during Led Zeppelin's incredible 10-year run from 1969 to 1979. Gonna do my best to recreate them all. We'll see how that goes. A few of these I learned pretty quickly just for this video, so forgive any inaccuracies that you may hear. Let's get started. At number 10, we have Jimmy at his most melodic and least bombastic, with the first of two entries on this list pulled from what I consider to be the band's greatest recorded achievement, 1975's Physical Graffiti. This track, certainly a highlight on an album full of highlights, yet short on high-profile tracks, save Kashmir that is, has up to 14 layers of guitar at times throughout its 6.5-minute runtime, and was initially composed as an instrumental until Robert Plant added some vocals, and then the band kind of shifted gears a little bit with the track. Just a fantastic and, like I said, melodic and somewhat restrained guitar solo put down by Page on this one, and apparently one of the very few that he ever played on a Fender Stratocaster. Regardless, without a doubt in my mind, one of his very best. Let's check out my pick for number 10 greatest Jimmy Page guitar solo. On to the number 9 greatest Jimmy Page guitar solo, track 1, side 1 of Led Zeppelin's debut album. This wasn't exactly Jimmy's grand introduction to the guitar world, as he already did that with the Yardbirds and numerous session recordings in the mid to latter 60s. However, the scale, scope, and importance of this debut album far exceeded anything he had done before. In this solo, the world at large finally got to hear those big two-step bends and mad flurry of fuzzed up blues-based notes that were a big trademark of Jimmy's unique style. A vanguard set down by Page that would influence a whole host of guitarists throughout the 70s and beyond. Let's check out what we have as the number 9 greatest Jimmy Page guitar solo. On to number 8. We're going back to Physical Graffiti for this one, and easily one of my favorite Page solos, and songs for that matter. Like the solo to 10 Years Gone, this one shows off a more melodic side of Page's playing rather than the bombast. As it's not one of Jimmy's more high-profile solos, this one is often considered one of Jimmy's more underrated and or underappreciated lead breaks. Though, to be fair, I have seen it show up on a couple of discerning lists on the internet of the greatest Page solos. You know for damn sure it's going on mine, and I love this solo. This is the lovely and melodic solo to the Rover from Zeppelin's 1975 Physical Graffiti album as my number 8 greatest Page solo. On to number 7, the number 7 greatest Jimmy Page solo, which is also one of his most famous. This short stop-start bit of brilliance is the centerpiece of one of Zeppelin's most well-known tracks. Stemming from and opening Zeppelin's 1969 second album, aptly titled Led Zeppelin II, what starts with one of the most recognizable riffs in rock and roll history, the solo itself on its own, while extremely short, manages to leave a lasting impression itself that still sounds organic and powerful decades later. This is the solo to Whole Lotta Love as my number 7 greatest Jimmy Page solo. Short, sweet, and classic. Onwards and upwards to number 6. We're going back to the first album again, one last time with this one. A track that, like many tracks on this first album, was a reworking of someone else's composition, either classic blues tracks or more recent works, as is the case with this one. You know, not recent as of today, recent as of then. Originally written and released in 1967 by a fellow by the name of Jake Holmes, Jimmy would take this folky blues number while he was still with the Yardbirds and craft it into something with quite a bit more edge to it. As the Yardbirds never did record this track in the studio during Jimmy's time with the band, Jimmy would carry the track and his arrangement and his solo with him into the studio during the recording of Zeppelin's first album. Just a fantastic track and a highlight of this debut album, but it's the guitar solo and its inventiveness that really builds this song to its musical climax with its screaming fuzz tone and unison bends with the vocals and bends behind the nut and that kind of almost out of control flurry of notes that marks some of Page's best work. Let's check out what we have at number 6. On to number 5. Now, I've already sung its praises earlier in this video, so it definitely has a place here in my top 10, of course. And of course, we're talking about that somewhat polarizing, chaotic solo to Heartbreaker from Led Zeppelin 2. This is as good a time as any to observe what I already pointed out earlier in this video. The difference between the first half of the solo, the loose, unaccompanied part, and the more coherent and tighter second half of the solo. Like I said, one can really hear the difference with the flow and clarity of notes between the first chaotic half and the second much tighter half. Like I said, leading me to believe that the first half was exactly what Jimmy was going for, you know, a sloppy, blistering flurry of notes. Scales and scale runs, you know, meant as a jarring mid-song guitar statement. I personally think it's a thing of beauty and originality. This is the solo to Heartbreaker, both first half and second half, as my number 5 greatest Jimmy Page solo. My number 4 greatest Jimmy Page solo is a perennial placeholder on any list of Page's greatest solos, and the first, but not the last, from the band's 1971 album, Led Zeppelin 4. Few other Page solos can top this heavy hitter. It's one of the things that puts Black Dog on the classic rock apex that it very much deserves. Coming somewhat out of nowhere towards the end of the song, like a freight train, it never lets up, even as the song continues to slowly fade out. Just a remarkable Jimmy Page solo and highly worthy of being here in the top 5. Let's give it a listen and a playthrough, see how this goes. All right then, the top three. My pick at number 3 is the soul entry from the band's 1976 Presence album. And I'm only realizing now that I have no entries from Houses of the Holy or In Through the Outdoor. So many solos and only 10 to narrow it down to. Things are going to get missed, I guess. I can't pick them all. Now, Presence isn't Zeppelin's best album, though I don't think it's their worst either, but this track is the definite standout and Jimmy's own personal favorite Zeppelin track of the whole bunch. Don't know if it's his favorite guitar solo as well, but I think it is. I'm going to assume it is. It certainly is one of mine, and I had a really hard time placing it after Stairway to Heaven on my list, but yet, here we are. This is the solo to Achilles' Last Stand as my number 3 greatest Jimmy Page solo. All right, then, here it is at number 2, Stairway to Heaven, of course. Others would have this at number 1. Others would have it even lower down. But I've got another for number 1 that I feel is much more worthy of that position. Certainly one of, if not the granddaddy of melodic rock guitar solos. The solo to Stairway to Heaven is a masterclass on note choice, melody, and phrasing. A solo that's not particularly hard to play, but it's in the crafting of this solo is where the real magic lies. Like any good solo should be, it's a little song within the song, but this one takes on a whole life of its own, and it is so well known that the solo itself is as hummable as most top 10 hits, throughout history. This is the solo to Stairway to Heaven as my number 2 greatest Jimmy Page guitar solo. Maybe you've heard this one before. And finally, my number 1 greatest Jimmy Page guitar solo by its sheer absence thus far. I'm pretty sure most of you can guess which solo this is going to be. From 1970's Led Zeppelin 3, the only entry from Led Zeppelin 3, I absolutely had to go with the 2 solos to Since I've Been Loving You. Now, no matter how much Jimmy Page wandered around stylistically over the years, his playing has always been firmly rooted rooted in the blues, and his free-form blues improvisational powers really come to a complete head on both of these solos. The gentle and dynamic opening blues solo to the blistering and aggressive mid-song solo, both are phenomenal displays of Jimmy's blues and blues rock guitar soloing prowess. These are the solos to Since I've Been Loving You as my number one greatest Jimmy Page solo, or in this case, solos. All right, that's it. That's my top 10 Jimmy Page solos. I hope you enjoyed that. It was a lot of fun putting that one together and learning some new Page solos that I hadn't known before. Dazed and Confused and Good Times, Bad Times and Black Dog. Didn't know any of those a couple of days ago. And I hope you're well out there in your little guitar corner of the world, wherever that may be. Drop me a subscribe if you haven't done that already. Hit that little notification bell so you know when I upload something new. You guys take care of yourselves, those around you, and we'll see you next time. Cheers.